Okay, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Jenny Robbins. I am the chair of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board here in the city of Boulder, and I will be your moderator for the conversation this evening. First, if you have any questions, there is in the back by the door a table with index cards and pencils, so please feel free to write the questions down. And Robin, if you could raise your hand in the back, feel free to give the questions to Robin, and then she'll pass them up here for our Q&A after we get through the panel. Next, I'd like to just recognize some of the electeds that are in the room tonight. From Jonah Goose's office, we have Max Coker and Erica Blum. Thank you for being here. We have Kathy Gebhardt from the Department of Education. Thank you. Tina Marquez from Boulder City Council. Is there anybody that I missed? Raise your hand if you're elected and I did not call your name. Okay. All right. Very good. I'm really excited to help guide the discussion tonight. We have some amazing panelists with us. Before we dive in, I'm going to go ahead and introduce these panelists. We're lucky to be joined by a group of thoughtful, experienced voices who bring a range of perspectives for tonight's conversation. First, I'll introduce Judy Amabile. Judy is our current state senator for District 18, which includes Boulder, Superior, Louisville, Niwot, and Gun Barrel. She serves on the Joint Budget Committee and chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee. Next, we have Casey Becker. Casey has served in the Colorado House of Representatives from 2013 to 2021, serving as Majority Leader and Speaker. She was appointed by President Biden in 2021 to lead the Environmental Protection Agency for the Mountain and Plains region. Next, we have Mark Wallach. Mark has served on the Boulder City Council since 2019 and is currently running for a third term. We have Elliot Hood. Elliot was elected in November of 2024 for CU Region at Large. He represents the state of Colorado on the CU Board of Regents. And then we have Joshua Mantell. Josh is the Director of Government Affairs for the Bell Policy Center, which is a Colorado organization that works to advance economic mobility and reform Tabor. So first we're going to start. Max has a couple of words from Joe Negus's, from our Representative Negus's office, so he'll come up and say a few words. And then we'll hand it over to Joshua to talk a little bit about HR 1, and then we'll move on to the panel. So here is Max.
Hi everyone, I'll be very brief. The Congressman wanted me to just, first of all, thank everyone on the stage today and the teams behind them. Have been such strong partners with the Congressman's office as we try to navigate through this really treacherous situation. It really represents the biggest rollback of our social safety net since the 90s. The Congressman's office is right now working on documenting every story from every family. We really need to hear from the community. We need to hear from every researcher losing grant funding. And to that end, we have a spot on our website for folks to share their story, for us to elevate. So the strongest case we can make is through the impacts being made in the community. Concerned is not really a strong enough word to convey how the Congressman feels about the nearly 12 million Americans losing their Medicaid and SNAP funding. We would really like to just have everyone reach out to us with all these stories so we can elevate them. We just really appreciate you all taking the time to come out and work with us on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Okay, next. Next, I'll pass over to Joshua, who will go through HR 1 and the unique challenges that we are going to have to deal with here in Colorado.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, all of you, for being here. It's just doing this work day in and day out. Sometimes you're not sure if people are really paying attention to what's going on, and so it's just great to see folks here getting themselves informed and learning about all of these challenges that we are facing due to the actions of the administration and the majority in Congress. I just want to thank Senator Amabile for inviting the Bell Policy Center here. Senator Amabile has been a great partner for us, working in the state to advance economic mobility for every Coloradan in Colorado. So my job here is to kind of set the scene and really detail what was in the bill that passed and signed into law on July 4th, and kind of set the stage for these folks to kind of talk about in their specific area the types of specific impacts that are going to occur. At the bottom line, this bill was a cut, as the gentleman from Representative Magoose's office said, cut to the social safety net, specifically Medicaid and SNAP, as well as a bunch of clean energy programs in order to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy and increasing funding for the Trump administration's deportation agenda. And that's really the core of this. So everything that I talk about kind of stems from that bottom line here. It still doesn't pay for itself. It will add trillions of dollars to the deficit, the federal deficit, and while there are some tax cuts for low and middle income earners, those are dwarfed by the costs of the program cuts as well as the downstream economic impacts that we will see from hospital closures, from folks not being able to afford food on their tables, and from job losses due to the cuts that we will see from the federal government. The richest 1% in Colorado, just to give folks a sense of the scale that we're talking about, those are folks making at least $860,000 a year. We'll get an average of about $71,000 in tax cuts. And those making up to $100,000, at most we'll see $2,000 in tax cuts. Most likely for those folks below $100,000, significantly less. And we're in a unique position as Colorado because there are a lot of states that can kind of figure out how to make ends meet by balancing their spending with the revenue that they're taking in from taxes. As I'm sure a lot of you know, we are not able to do that because of Tabor and the constraints that Tabor puts onto our Constitution and our way of budgeting and doing the work. So just to kind of set the stage, I don't know if that's me. So we're looking at, in the very near term, about $100 million in administrative costs to the state in order to implement the programs that the federal government put in place. So the federal government is putting in cuts that now the state has to spend money on to implement. And those are work requirements mostly. The fact of the matter is that people on Medicaid and SNAP are working. Two in three people on Medicaid have a full-time job, okay? The rest of those people are either disabled, caring for a loved one, or doing other kinds of work, doing other kinds of work, or attending school. And so administrating the work requirements is actually more expensive than it is to just give Medicaid benefits to everybody who would be eligible under the law. And so we're also seeing that we will limit Medicaid to folks who have not been in the country long enough per the administration's rules. So lawful permanent residents, green card holders can only have it after a 5-year waiting period. So that's 5 years going without health care, most likely, before they're able to do it. Those are costs that will be borne by the rest of us. I'm sure many of you saw that the Department of Insurance said that we will see a 28% increase in premiums on the individual marketplace due purely to the actions of the federal government. So everybody on the individual marketplace will see their premiums rise because of the cuts coming from the federal government. So that's cuts that are now borne on the backs of hardworking Coloradans. Just more broadly speaking, about $1 billion of cuts to the Medicaid program. Medicaid's about 32% of our budget right now. We're talking about $1 billion in cuts. We have a $16 billion, $17 billion general fund, so it's a pretty significant amount of money that we do not have the means to make up through our current budget. The marketplace and subsidies for folks who are buying individual insurance will be cut substantially. And then we're seeing about 70,000 Coloradans at risk of losing their SNAP benefits. These are the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Some people think of them as food stamps, but these are the things that people have in order to buy food and put food on the table for their families. And so we're seeing some really, really significant cuts that will come to Colorado. And really the only way that we will be able to deal with this and still fund the other things that we care about is through getting more revenue into the state system. And in the Bell Policy Center's mind, that is figuring out a way to make the wealthy who are getting this windfall from the federal government pay a little bit more in taxes to the state so that we can afford to provide health care and food to the population, to our constituents, to the people of this state. And so we look forward to that. We had to cut $1.2 billion from our budget last year. We're looking at least $700 million of cuts next year that I'm sure Senator Amabile can speak to more specifically than I can. But the only way to make up this money is through more revenue. And so the way that we need to do that is by making the people who have pay a little bit more so that the people who don't and need the help can actually get it. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to the other folks for specifics.
Judy, if you want to go next, that would be great. Thank you.
So let me just start out by saying, first of all, thank you very much for that, and thank you, Jenny, and thanks to all the panelists for being here, and thank you all for coming tonight. There's a lot of more fun things to do than this, probably. This might be one of the most depressing panel discussions that ever was. So I just want to start with this. We are going to be okay. We are going to get through it, but it's not every single one of us is going to be okay. And that is why it's so important that we get this as right as we can. So I'm on the Joint Budget Committee, and so I have the privilege of being on a 6-person team that is going to slash funding for a lot of the things that you all care about. And one of the things that I want to really stress is that if we can, instead of siloing ourselves off into our corners and saying, I care about this thing, I care about education, I care about long-term services and supports for Medicaid, I care about energy policy, and if you cut anything from my thing that I care about, I'm going to really scream and yell. What we really need to do is come together and decide as a group what are the priorities and how can we spread the pain around in a way that everybody isn't, no one is getting ahead of anybody else and everybody is sharing a little bit in what we have to do. We have to do it. So just one of the Republican talking points is that we have overspent here in Colorado. And I want to assure you we have not done that because we cannot do that. Every year we have to have a balanced budget. And we have Tabor. And Tabor says, even beyond balancing your budget, if we take in more revenue than this artificial cap of calculation of where we were last year plus interest plus population growth, anything above that amount that we take in revenue, we have to give back. And we have lots of different creative ways of giving that money back. But it really impacts what we can do with our general fund. And I know that a lot of this stuff is really in the weeds, but I think at a high level, people need to understand that in 25-26, fiscal year 25-26, the way that we do our taxes here in Colorado is that you take your adjusted gross income from your federal tax, and that's what you pay your Colorado tax on for the most part. So we are coupled with the federal tax. And so all of the things, all of the tax breaks, we have to take a hit in Colorado because you're going to pay less Colorado tax on all of those things too. And while that may sound good, it's a $1.2 billion hit to our revenue in 25-26. So that is, the big ones are business depreciation. There's some tax advantage in the way that they're structuring that now. That's $500 million. The deduction for overtime. Yes, hardworking people who are working overtime, deserve to have a good life. But that one deduction is going to cost the state $170 million. $60 million for the no tax on tips. They raise the state and local tax deduction. That's $50 million. The interest on new car loans is now deductible. That's $50 million. So, and charitable deductions, they changed that. That's now $51 million. So while any one of these things might benefit a lot of the people here in this room, in aggregate, it is going to hurt our state, and it is going to hurt all of us eventually. because we have to make cuts to the things we care about, like K through 12 education and energy and environmental policy and transportation and infrastructure, roads and bridges, and all of those things are going to take a hit. And then the Medicaid stuff, the cuts, this is very cynical the way this was done, and smart, I guess. All of the tax benefits come in the beginning, and some of them are temporary, but the ones for the wealthiest people are permanent. The tax on overtime, tax on tips, those are temporary. But the Medicaid cuts don't come until 26, 27. And what you should all understand, because the description you got about what that looks like is, it is going to be devastating for the people who receive Medicaid. But every single person in this room is going to pay a lot more for their health care, because we are literally taking billions of dollars out of our healthcare system, but we are not reducing the amount of healthcare that is needed. We are just reducing the amount of money that is in the system to pay for it. And one of the big ways that's happening is this hospital provider fee. And it's complicated how it works, but we charge a fee on hospitals, and then they draw down federal reimbursement that's much higher than the fee that they paid. So the hospitals love it, Medicaid recipients love it. Everybody, this has been a working thing, and it's getting dramatically reduced. So in this budget, we have to figure that out. And yes, I'm not supposed to say it out loud, but there will be a special session. And we will try to go after some of the things that we can do right now, but next year's budget is going to be immensely challenging. So on that happy note.
Thank you, Judy. I think next we'll go to Casey and learn a little bit about climate effects today.
Thank you, Senator Amabile, for having me, and thank you, Jenny, for moderating. My name's Casey Becker, and I currently serve as the CEO for COSA, the Colorado Solar and Storage Association. So I represent renewable energy companies in regulatory, like at the PUC and at the state legislature, trying to promote renewable energy. But before this, I was in the Biden administration, and then before that, I was in the state legislature. And before that, I was a lawyer. So I feel like I have to talk about the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch, because I've done them pretty much all. But Judy's asked us to talk about the One Big Beautiful Bill, which I have a really hard time saying. So I'm not going to call it that. I'll call it HR 1. I will note when President Trump is out there saying that he's told his administration, when they talk about coal, to not say coal, but to say beautiful, clean coal. And I am not going to do that. So there are actions in HR 1, which are going to really impact clean energy investment and impact climate. There are also actions that have happened in the judicial branch and things that President Trump has done through executive action. But I'm going to start with HR 1. So the big thing that bill does is really cuts back renewable energy investments. These investments have existed for a long, long time. They were expanded in the Inflation Reduction Act. And the first thing is it immediately ends by December 31st. The consumer tax credit that you all get if you put rooftop solar on your roofs. So if you did it, you got a tax credit, that immediately goes away. Then the investment tax credits and the production tax credits that existed for renewable energy get phased out much more quickly. And what that ultimately means is higher energy bills for you, less investment in clean energy, and job losses for people in the solar and wind and battery storage space. It also means that we're ceding ground in this really important sector of the economy to China. The Inflation Reduction Act onshored a bunch of manufacturing or solar panels and different technologies because there was a tax incentive to do that. This gets rid of those tax incentives And so it means China is going to continue to be the leader in this space. And that means less manufacturing jobs, but it also means, Colorado has 8,000 jobs in the solar industry alone, and we are looking at thousands of those jobs disappearing over the next couple of years. Why does it mean higher energy bills for you? Because if you're not incentivizing this energy, which is lower cost than coal or oil and gas, those are going to continue to be a larger part of our energy mix, and they cost more. So, and then it just means that the investors, and because of the tariffs, a lot of those investors and that investment is sitting on the sidelines. So it has an impact on climate, it has an impact on the money coming into the state to invest in the state, it has an impact on the job, and it has an impact on your energy bills. Some of the other things that exist in HR 1 is it repeals the methane emissions fee. So when I was at EPA, Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which included a methane emissions fee. That fee was an incentive to oil and gas companies to lower their emissions. Lowering your methane emissions. Lowering your methane means you're capturing more oil and gas, which they can then sell. It means you're making workers safer, because when you have methane emissions at wellhead and there are workers there, they're more impacted. And it just is better for the climate. It repeals that fee for 10 years. It repeals funding for state and local environmental reviews. It phases out tax credits for EV charging, and just investment in EVs. It expands tax credits for coal. It requires the Department of Interior to accelerate energy projects, oil and gas and coal, on public lands. It requires them to increase lease sales of oil and gas and coal on public lands. It requires the U.S. Forest Service to increase annual sales by 250 million board feet for logging on public lands. It requires that there be 5 lease sales in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. And it just overall requires an increase of offshore oil and gas leasing and coal leasing in public lands. So Donald Trump keeps calling renewable energy the Green New Scam. And as I mentioned, he keeps calling investments in beautiful clean coal. So this is not only going to set us back in our climate goals, but it's also forcing investment in the more expensive energy resources, and it's doing it to our public lands in many respects. I also just mentioned there's been a lot of executive action, and on Friday, the EPA administrator announced that he is closing down the Office of Research and Development at EPA. 3,000 jobs. These are the scientists that do research on climate, but also research on water quality. They do research on chemicals to say, what is ethylene oxide and how is it impacting you? What is PFAS? All of these people are about to lose their jobs. It is literally thousands of jobs, but thousands of hours doing research on the things that pollute our land, air, and water. And then there's also been judicial action, but I've run out of my 5 minutes, so thanks for listening.
Thank you, Casey. All right, next we'll move on to our Boulder City Council member, Mark Wallach.
Okay, thank you all for coming tonight, especially given the depressing nature of this conversation. This is an impossible topic. I could talk about this for an hour. You are blessed that I can only do it for 5 minutes. We are dealing with an administration that has a relentless focus on inflicting cruelty upon those at the bottom end of the economic scale. I've never seen anything like it, and I'm sure you have not either. You know, we have 5,000 members of this community that receive SNAP benefits. We have 14,000 members of this community that are on Medicaid. they are all going to suffer. And at the moment, this city is in a constrained financial position, and we have no capacity to make up those gaps right now. So there is going to be suffering, and there are going to be people who are going to experience homelessness, hunger, untreated illness, and on and on. It's something that none of us have ever seen the like of, and their creativity in inflicting this kind of cruelty seems to know no bounds. There are a couple of areas where we're doing less poorly than I would have anticipated, but keep in mind that any of these things could change in a day. ICE has been only a partial presence in Boulder, but with a phone call from Stephen Miller, that could change, and we could have 100 agents circulating among our manufactured home communities and rounding up people they think are undocumented, or who are documented and they just don't like them. Housing vouchers were thought to be cut very substantially. At the moment, it looks like they're being sort of flatlined at the current levels. That is a cut in and of itself as rents increase, but it's not as calamitous as it could have been.
Can I get a question?
We have about $97 million that we rely upon in federal transportation grants. We have about 50 million of them, 50 some odd million, that are still outstanding. We have yet received no indication that any of those will be canceled. That's today. Who knows what is going to happen tomorrow? So it's impossible to plan because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We don't know what crises we're going to have to deal with tomorrow and next week and next month. And the one thing we do know is that there's going to be a lot of suffering in this community. And it's going to be the people who are least capable of enduring that kind of suffering who are going to be most affected and are going to bear the brunt of this administration's policies. Again, I've been on the council for 6 years. I have never seen anything remotely like this. I've never seen a government that is so callous about the welfare of all of its citizens and focuses only upon the welfare of its richest citizens. There's no way I can articulate this other than what I just said. This is the most heartless administration in my lifetime, which has gotten to be pretty long. So we will do the best that we can. We will try to provide as many services as we can. We will not be able to fill the gaps entirely until this administration fades into the dustbin of history. But that's not happening today, and it's not happening tomorrow, so we will have to endure for some period of time. And I don't mean to be as pessimistic as I've just sounded. Actually, I do. This is really a bad situation, but we will endure, and we will ultimately come out the other end, and we will be able to treat our citizens the way they ought to be treated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Last but certainly not least, you can use this one if that one doesn't get through. We have Elliot Hood, our CU Regent.
Good evening. Before I get into the impacts of the actual big, disgusting, heinous bill, I want to talk about just federal funding in CU generally, because higher ed has been under attack since day one of this administration. So let me just kind of set the stage. CU gets about $1 billion a year in federal research funds. That's out of our budget of about $6.7 billion, so a pretty sizable chunk. We've sustained some cuts to federal funding, and I want to stress this, every single professor, researcher at our university who loses their grant, that's awful, and that is significant for them. But in the grander scale, we've avoided catastrophic cuts to research funding. For instance, we have 5,800 active grants right now at CU, and I'm talking about across the 4-campus system, not just Boulder, but Denver, Colorado Springs, and the Anschutz Medical Campus in Aurora. Out of 5,800 active grants, we've had 87 terminations. That's resulted in 31.6 FTE layoffs and 2 furloughs. That's 7 positions at CU Boulder, 17 at Anschutz, 7.6 at Denver, and 0 at University of Colorado Springs. We've lost $75.6 million in federal funding out of the total billion that we get. Again, significant for those researchers who lost that money, but in the grander scheme of things, we've avoided a catastrophic level of cuts. CU Boulder, unfortunately, has taken the brunt of those losses, so 64.6 million out of the 75 has come from CU Boulder. I would say that some of the more drastic potential cuts that we could have experienced, which came in the form of NIH and NSF reimbursement rates for grants or for indirect costs for grants. So we typically get, their indirect costs can be up to 50 to 60% of grant spending. The administration told us in January that it was going to be 15%, and that would have resulted in a massive amount of cut to our funding. And thankfully, those cuts have been enjoined in the courts. So thank God for lawyers, right? Yes, I say that because I'm a lawyer. So let me talk about the big heinous bill. So I'll start with graduate student loans. So starting July 1, 2026, no more loans up to the cost of a program. So that's kind of the way it is now. You can borrow up to the cost of your program. After that, grad students can borrow up to $20,500 a year with a lifetime cap of $100,000. That's down from about $140,000, which is the cap right now. So $40,000 reduction. For professional degrees, like law and medicine, the cap will be about $50,000 a year, with an increase in lifetime cap from $138,500 to $200,000. So non-professional graduate students are getting kicked in the butt, but professional grad students are getting a lift or an increase in their cap. Pell Grants. The threats to Pell Grants that we thought were coming didn't happen, thankfully. The bill actually expands access to Pell Grants for on-the-job training certification programs at community colleges, so it's a net positive for people receiving Pell Grants. Unfortunately, beginning in July 2026, students with a full ride scholarship, they're not eligible for Pell Grants. And I will say that this bill does fund a $10.5 billion shortfall in the Pell Grant program. So on the Pell side, it's actually a net positive. College endowments. This doesn't apply to CU, but if your alma mater is a private school, watch out, because the tax rate is going from 1.4% to as much as 8%, which could be massive. I think that's directed at places like Harvard and Penn and Princeton, but that's going to impact small liberal arts colleges too. So that's going to be terrible. But CU, as a public university, won't be impacted by that. There's a really interesting accountability earnings test that's part of this bill, where undergraduate programs whose graduates earn less on average than they could with only a high school diploma are not eligible for federal loans. So if you have a family member going to a college or university that has a program that on average their graduates are making less than people with a high school diploma, they cannot take out federal loans. That is not going to impact four-year research institutions like CU, I hope. But it's a program-by-program basis, so it could happen to our school. So the good news is that, and I asked our CFO this morning, can you identify a tangible example of how the big, disgusting, heinous bill is going to impact CU's programs? Is it going to result in a net loss of funding? And he said, the good news is there's no clear indication right now that any specific program at CU is going to lose funding from this bill. But it's clear that patients and providers are going to get slammed by the Medicaid cuts. And we do a lot of clinical care at our Anschutz campus. The loan caps are obviously going to impact graduate students. So this is, as an institution, we're not going to be directly impacted as much, but of course our students and our researchers and our staff and everybody who's impacted by the ongoing onslaught against higher ed is going to be impacted. I would say that the biggest potential impact is just through the state budgeting process. So, as Judy mentioned, there's a lot of stress. What? Oh yeah, exactly. So as she mentioned, there are a lot of additional stressors on the general fund, like new tax policy that results in less money coming to the state. And then there are Medicaid changes. And we didn't talk about this yet, but these work requirements are going to require people in the state to verify those things, and that's going to cost money. And so that's going to make it so we have less money in the general fund and the same number of programs out there that need that money. And higher ed is the largest discretionary expenditure in the budget. So you form the logical chain on that one. But you love higher ed, don't you? Yeah. I know you do. So I'm going to end on a bit of good news. Okay. So this year we had 21 students across our system who had their visas revoked by the Trump administration. Every single one of those visas has been reinstated. Every single one. I am also a school attorney, so I do K through 12 work, and I have some notes on the impacts on K through 12. So if anybody's interested in that, I'm certainly prepared to respond to a question along those lines as much as I can, but I'll cede my time just for questions at this point. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to give another round of applause for our wonderful panel before we move to Q&A. We had a lot of questions that came in, pre-questions as people were registering, so we're going to try to get to as many as we can tonight. If you have one, please feel free to grab an index card from the back and bring it up. I'll start by asking individual questions. If anybody else on the panel feels the need to jump in, I will not stop you, but in a matter of time, try and get through as many questions as we can. Hopefully we can do one at a time. So the first question that we have is a two-part question for Josh. What do you think of the idea of asking voters to take something they like education, Medicaid, out from under the Tabor cap? What benefit would that provide for the rest of the budget? And then a follow-up, is this a chance to overturn Tabor?
Well, that's a lot of questions right there. So I think what the question is asking is, should we take some of the money outside of the general fund so that we have more room within the general fund to fund the other things? And I think one of the problems that we're seeing with that right now is we actually don't have the money within the general fund to do any of that. So if we were to take those programs outside of the general fund, we'd still be underneath the Tabor cap in a way that we would still have to cut things in order to get there. And so, which is why I made the point that I think what we need is not a shift around of revenue within the system, but whole new revenue to be brought in to be able to fund all of these things together. And as the senator said, we're going to be pitting these really important programs against each other in some ways to see what is more important to cut and what is not. And that is the wrong way to be thinking about these kinds of things. All of these things are important. Clean energy is important. Medicaid is important. SNAP's important. Education is important. Higher education is important. All these things are important. We need to fund all of them so that the people of Colorado can have access to them. And so what the Policy Center and a lot of our partners in this space are working on is we would like to bring something to the ballot for the voters where we are not overturning Tabor in whole necessarily, but are reforming parts of Tabor where we currently are not allowed to tax the wealthy at a different rate than everybody else. So if we wanted to give a tax cut to the people who are really struggling, we can't do that unless we're also giving a tax cut to the wealthiest Coloradans that live here. If we want to raise taxes on the wealthiest Coloradans, we can't do that unless we raise taxes on everybody. And so we need a system where we're asking the wealthy to pay a little bit more, we give a little bit of relief to those people at the bottom, and we're putting the money that the state is getting into all of these programs so that we can finally fully fund our education system. We can fully fund higher education. We can make up for the cuts that we're seeing coming from the federal government, and who else knows what other cuts are coming down the line here, and being able to provide a future for Coloradans apart from what the federal government sees as the right way to do things.
And then the second question was, is this a chance to overturn Tabor?
So I think, in terms of overturning Tabor, I don't think the people of Colorado are quite there yet, from what I've seen. People really do want to have guardrails on how government spends its money. And I think that in some ways that is reasonable. And so but there are so many aspects of Tabor that people don't understand that I think we have an opportunity to modernize Tabor, to get it to a place where we can actually do things for our state instead of waiting for the wealthiest people to contribute to the greater good. And so I think that overturning Tabor is an extremely important long-term goal and something that I wish we would work towards over time. But I think for the near term, for this acute crisis moment that we're in, we just need the revenue into our system and doing it in an equitable way where we're asking the wealthy to pay their fair share.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Appreciate it. Very good answer. Okay, next we have Senator Amabile. Can you please talk about the scholarship?
Oh
Sorry.
man, Kathy got to go first.
She did. I did it on purpose. The language in the HR 1. Would you support legislation that requires any funding that might be available to all students?
Okay, so luckily this wasn't a gotcha situation, because I haven't really paid that much attention to it, but Kathy Gebhardt, who's on the State Board of Ed, asked me to talk about this tonight. And if I get it wrong, then we'll just hand the mic over to her. So what's in there is this scholarship granting organization where the governor of every state can decide if that state wants to participate. It allows people to donate $1,700 per person or $3,400 per couple to a scholarship granting organization, and then they get a tax deduction for that. And if we don't put some guardrails around what these organizations use the money for, we will be moving in the direction of a voucher program where we are funding scholarships by giving tax credits, and then people are going to be using that money to go to private institutions. And so the question is, would I support legislation that says if we do that here in Colorado, which we might want to do, because we might want the money that comes with that, then we have to put the guardrails around it that say that money has to go to every school, public school, and charter school. It has to go evenly to all of those schools. Did I get that right?
Thank you, Senator. The next one is for Mark. Which programs in Boulder are most at risk for cuts or reduction given the flat city budget?
Don't say parks.
Parks.
Parks exclusively. I think everybody is at risk to some extent. Even with flat revenues, the budget is in effect contracting. The police officers are going to have a raise this year. It doesn't have to be a big raise, but it's costing us money. The firemen are going to get a raise. If you want to stay competitive in the marketplace, you have to be able to give at least merit raises to staff. Even if inflation is 3 or 4% over the year, that's going to be millions of dollars in terms of the cost of goods. So if the revenues are staying at this level, you're in fact declining. I don't think there are too many sacred cows at this point, and I would urge us not to have any sacred cows, because not everything can be done. Staff is pretty good about looking at programs and trying to reallocate funding when necessary. It's going to be necessary, and I don't know that we're going to have a new South Boulder Rec Center this year, but we need to be able to provide core services to our people, and that's public safety, that's fire, and the like. We have to do what governments are supposed to do. We have to fill in potholes. We have to occasionally plow the streets in winter. And we have to, those are things we have to do. And we have a homeless population, and we have to be able to deal equitably with them as well. So I think everybody is in effect equally on the block. And I would urge us to be looking at all programs sort of from a zero-sum basis. What's working, what's not working, and if it's not working, don't be afraid to reallocate money to something else. I can't tell you exactly what those reallocations will be yet, because we don't know exactly what the dimensions of our shortfall is going to be. But it's coming, and we're going to need to respond accordingly.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, next we're going to KC. What are the most impactful actions citizens can take to help preserve funding for food, healthcare, education, research, science, the environment, and emergency response, including fire?
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. It's a big one. You can pick two if you like.
The most impactful actions citizens can take to preserve funding for a variety of things. Okay, you pay taxes at the city, county, state, and federal level, and then there are various special districts that you might pay funding taxes to: fire districts, library districts, recreation districts. I think that Boulder is one of the most generous communities out there. We typically have a higher tax rate than a lot of our surrounding communities. We also have higher salaries, and so Boulder's a very well-funded city. You could take a city the size of Boulder in Colorado and another city, and our revenue is much higher. I think it's important that the city prioritize, because even though we are generous, and even though we have higher salaries that support higher taxes, there's always more things that we are asking government to do and that government cannot do. It is important that we ask our city council to prioritize and that we be careful of mission creep in all of those entities. The federal government is in the process of cutting funding. That's what the rescission bill was a week ago. That's what HR 1 was a month ago. Because Congress is getting the signals that people feel like it's being wasteful. So we need to make sure that, and I was a government major and I was a government lawyer. I'm like way into everything government. So, and I was a government legislator. I was a legislator. So we have to make sure that people don't get, and this is sort of what Josh is saying, people want to hold government accountable for its spending. And we have to make sure that we are showing that we as government at the local, federal, or state level showing value in the dollars so that we can preserve funding for, food, healthcare, education, research, etc. Like right now in our country, people are pushing back against what they see as wasteful government spending, against waste, fraud, and abuse. They are seeing, the Governor Polis has been running on an agenda of trying to cut taxes, and it's been popular here in Colorado because people are not convinced that government is doing a good job with its tax dollars. So I think all of us have a responsibility to the extent that we believe, and I do, that government is a way to be a force multiplier and a way to share resources and provide support for people that need it most. We have to constantly show that we're doing a good job with those resources.
That's great. Thank you very much. Elliot, I'm going to throw one to you, a little bit of a softball, since this is exactly how you ended your 5 minutes. What is the impact of federal cuts to K through 12 education?
Yeah, set myself up for that one. All right, so let me touch on 3 topics. One is Medicaid. So not many people realize this, but Medicaid is a huge source of funding for K-12. Huge source. And districts use that money to hire health professionals like nurses and occupational therapists and school psychologists, people who help kids with health-related needs. And less Medicaid funding, less money for those things. And there was a survey taken recently by the state superintendent association or whatever, and they said that they anticipate that this is going to directly result in layoffs at their schools for those staff. And we all know how important those staff are to helping our kids. Food assistance. So the work requirements and cuts to SNAP is going to be really awful. And when I graduated CU Boulder, the first job I got was teaching in a 5th grade in a extremely poor neighborhood, and lots of my kids' families were on SNAP, and all of them virtually were on free and reduced lunch at my school. And I knew as a teacher exactly which kids were hungry that day because they couldn't concentrate, and I knew that their families were struggling. And food makes a huge difference for kids. And I used to bring food to stock in my classroom to make sure my kids had food because I knew some of them struggled with that. And it breaks my heart as a former teacher to know that there's an estimated 1 million kids in this country that are going to lose, whose families are going to lose food assistance from this bill. It's outrageous, and it's going to hurt our kids, and it's going to hurt our schools. And then the scholarship granting organizations, the SGOs, that's a glorified voucher program. Let's call it what it is. I don't support vouchers because they suck money out of our public school system where it should be. And so this program is going to do just that. And it also, it's a massive tax incentive for wealthy people. You get a dollar for dollar benefit if you donate to one of these SGOs, regardless of how much you donate. And you can donate or you can receive funding from this if you make up to $225,000 a year as a household. So, vouchers at least were geared toward low-income families. This is not geared toward low-income families. This is geared toward middle and higher-income families as well. And I'm deeply suspect of what this is going to do in this whole program, and it's going to directly impact our schools one way or another.
Thank you, Elliot. Next question is for Judy. I'm concerned about middle-income housing. What state and federal funds will and will not be available to this to the city to help us incentivize middle-income housing? Actually, if we could have maybe Mark and Judy answer that one, that would be great.
Age before beauty.
Well, then here. First of all, the feds provide very little in terms of funding for middle-income housing. We have good programs in the city to create affordable housing, not middle income. Boulder Housing Partners now has 2,000 units under its management, and I would regard them as the premier housing authority in the state, if not the country. They do an incredible job. But they do not build middle-income housing. Nobody builds middle-income housing. In fact, in the last 10 years, the city of Boulder has produced 45 units of deed-restricted middle-income housing. Not 45 a year, 45 in 10 years. Okay, that's effectively zero. Okay, and the problem that we have is that the land cost in Boulder is so high. You can spend $750,000 to buy a 6,000 square foot lot. You will spend $2 to $3 million to buy an acre of land, if you can find one, okay? At those price points, nobody, no developer can afford to build $500,000 to $600,000 townhouses. Can't be done. I'm speaking now as somebody who used to be a developer, and I understand the economics of it. I don't like the economics of it, but that's the fact. So our ability in Boulder to create middle-income housing is going to be very limited because the economics do not permit it. I don't mean to be even gloomier than I was before, but this is an area where there are federal programs, LIHTC programs, where we can build affordable housing, and private capital invests in those, and they get tax breaks for doing so, but there are no such subsidies for middle-income housing. It's very, very difficult. Be more cheery.
Okay, on that happy note. So I will say I'm a huge believer in home ownership. And it used to be, and these are not the exact numbers because I don't remember, but it used to be that the average age when somebody bought their first home was 26, and now it's like 38. It's just gone up dramatically because it is so hard to buy a home. And I believe that we should be doing everything we can to help more people become homeowners, because I'm guessing a lot of you in here live in a home you own, and it just creates incredible economic stability for you. You can rent it, you can rent out a room, you can borrow against it, and your costs are pretty stable. I mean, maybe not lately with property tax and insurance going up the way they have. But, so last year we had a very creative bill that it asked the treasurer to invest money out of the permanent fund, which is this $1.8 billion fund that's for education and can only be spent on education, but it is all invested. So we asked them to invest some of this money in housing, housing for educators, for sale housing for educators. And what it did was it gave them down payment assistance and then a relatively low income loan. So the down payment, when they go to sell the house, they have to pay it back. And they have to pay back 10% of the appreciation on the home. So most home ownership opportunities that the state is involved in, or the city or whoever, you don't get hardly any appreciation when you go to sell. But in this program you do. You get 90% of the appreciation, and the state gets 10% return on their down payment assistance. So it is a win-win-win, and we just need to keep coming up with ideas like that. And my hope is that we will expand that program using the Unclaimed Property Trust Fund, the third rail of the last session.
Thank you, Judy. Next, I would like to talk a little bit about our federal labs in Boulder. I was at an event last weekend where, and feel free, I'm going to put this one on Casey and Mark, I think, since it's the city of Boulder. They presented that the president had sent a budget proposal of $0 for NOAA. And NOAA, obviously being a really important federal lab, both for Boulder's economy and for the nationwide, what can we do to stop that from happening? And how do we protect our labs?
I'll start, having been an attorney for the federal government and then a Biden appointee. The courts have recently decided that the president has a lot of leeway in pulling back dollars on how federal agencies are funded. And so he's pulling back money for NOAA, he's pulling back money for EPA because he's saying, I see the money better spent elsewhere, and I don't want to support the science that these folks are doing. So it is a good question, but it's not one that's easily solved locally. Like, these are local jobs, and those are local people who generate local taxes, and it's also science that supports so much of our federal action. But the way that we address this is we elect a different president.
That's a great idea. I never thought about it. The impact of what they are doing goes beyond the job losses. We have a reputation as a research-oriented and entrepreneurial community, and that is going to be damaged by the evisceration of our research facilities, and this program of let's make China great again. I think that there's no easy way to stop it short of electing a different Congress in 26 and a different government entirely in 28. That's not really the kind of news you want to hear, because we're talking about 28 and we're only in 25. But unfortunately, we made a grave error in 2024, and we're going to be paying for that error for the next 3 years. But as I said earlier, I think that the wheel will turn on this. People will end up being disgusted at what's happened to their country. There are more people who are not tech barons than are tech barons, and I think people will at some point start to rise up. You know, everybody who gets cut from Medicaid is going to be an opposition vote, because we're hurting them in a personal way. Hopefully in 2028, the country as a whole will rethink what it did in 24 and take a different path. I would shudder to think what the impact would be if we didn't do that in 28, but I'm an optimist, and so I think the odds are pretty good that this anti-cultural, anti-science, anti-equitable treatment of poorer people administration is going to, frankly, piss off enough people so that there's a good chance, if we are careful, I don't want to get in the weeds on politics, but there's a good chance that we can make that pendulum swing again. That's my hope, and I'm optimistic we can get it done.
I'm going to add to this. So, with an anecdote, that at CU, so in the beginning months of the Trump administration, we had a grant program at CU Denver that was reliant almost entirely on federal dollars. And that program was training teachers to go and address shortages of teachers in rural districts in Colorado. And it was part of a national effort to do that. And our federal delegation, as well as our lobbyists, went to so all the Congress people and the senators, and including Representative Lauren Boebert. And we said, hey, this is a huge deal for rural communities. And we need you to advocate for this program with the administration. And Representative Boebert actually listened to that, okay? Believe it or not. And she actually wrote a letter to the Trump administration saying, how dare you cut this program that's helping teachers in my district? And they have reversed course on that grant, and they have maintained the funding for that program at CU Denver and other programs across the country. The lesson is there are allies in the government of the Trump administration that you can appeal to. And you may not agree with them on 99% of what they do and say, but they could be a receptive ear for the people that you want to convince. And on this subject of labs, if you look at the labs that they're slating to close with NOAA, those labs are not just in Boulder. They're in red states too. They're in districts with Republican congresspeople. And those people don't want the thousands of jobs that those labs create to go away. At the end of the day, that's bad business for them. And I would imagine that if you lobbied those individual people enough and you explained the value of what those programs do in their districts, you could get enough bipartisan support to at least bend the ear of the Donald. And potentially reverse course in some of these drastic proposals. We have until October on the NOAA cuts to lobby. They haven't made that final decision yet, so let's be smart about it. We do have some arrows in our quiver, so let's use them.
You're not suggesting Boulder for president now.
No.
All right, switching topics a little bit, something we haven't really talked about much yet is transportation. So this one's for Judy and Joshua. In regard to the budget cuts, how do you see our public transportation and RTD affected?
Okay, well, I'll just start with last year. We heard from our caucus that they would rather cut transportation than Medicaid or K through 12. And so we did. We made massive cuts to the transportation budget. And I don't see us restoring that funding this year. I don't know that there's a whole lot more to cut, but if there is, we might. And sorry, I know it's not popular, but like a lot of what we cut was funding to local governments to build alternative modes, like bike paths and things like that. And in the environment we're in, that seemed like the right choice to make. And at some point, we have to get out of this place that we're in. But if I have to choose between feeding a hungry kid or building another bike path, I'm going to pick feeding a hungry kid every single time.
I'll just mostly second what Senator Amabile said, and I said this to her before we started, but the Joint Budget Committee was tasked with cutting about $1.2 billion from a $16 to $17 billion budget last year. And they were able to do that without touching Medicaid and education, in fact, increasing funding for Medicaid and education as part of that budget, which is not something that I can say I expected when the session started last year. And so, again, the problem is not that we don't know how to prioritize our funding, or we don't spend enough, or we've spent too much in places, and so we have to pare back now. The problem is we don't have enough money to spend on the things that voters and Coloradans care about and need. And so that's the issue that we're facing. I had a former boss who said, we're an increasingly blue state, but we fund ourselves like a red state, in that we just don't have the revenue and the tax base to be able to do all of the things that we, as Coloradans, know that is necessary to support the people of our state. And so when you're tasked with writing a budget where you have to cut $1.2 billion, and as the Senator said, you're kind of waffling between transportation funding in the future or Medicaid funding right now, it seems pretty clear to me where the least damage is done. But we need to get to a place where we're not doing damage at all, where we're funding the things that we need to fund. And so that's why we need more revenue into the system, as I said before, and doing that in a way that is equitable and making sure that the people who are struggling to get by are not the ones paying the bulk of the money, which is where we're at right now, where we're asking, the lowest quintile of people in our state are paying 20% of their income in taxes, and the top 1% are paying about 3 to 4% of their income in taxes. That is just not an equitable way to fund our state and the things that we need to do. And so when we ask people to pay more, they say, I already pay enough. And it's like, yes, you do. It's the other people who aren't paying enough. And that's the people who we need to ask to pay more into the system.
Okay, great. Thank you. Judy, I have one last question, and then I'll ask one question for the whole panel, and we can go down, and then that'll wrap up the Q&A portion. Judy, the question is, are there any civil rights, health rights, accessibility rights, etc. legislation we could pass in Colorado to protect us as our rights are taken at a national level?
Yeah, so I'll just say we have been doing a lot of that. We passed the Trans Bill of Rights. We passed a big immigration bill this session. We passed a bill that it memorializes EMTALA in Colorado, which is this Emergency Medical Treatment Act. We also ran a bill that says that disabled people have to be provided the least restrictive setting possible. So you cannot institutionalize people without who don't really need to be there, who could thrive in a home situation by providing them the supports that they need. And we added that to our Colorado statutes, even though it is already a matter of case law. So we have been doing a lot of that, and we will continue to do that as we see things, cracks. And one of the things that was in the big bill that was taken out was about public lands, selling off public lands. So I'm working on a bill for this coming session that is trying to, because we think that will come back, even though they took it out of the big bill, we think it'll be back in some form or fashion. And so some preventative steps that we could take that would make it so that even if some federal land does get sold, that we have a way of monitoring or controlling what happens to that land. And so we are working creatively, trying to think ahead. And if you guys have things that you see that you feel like need protecting, we're all ears.
Mark, did you want to add about what maybe we're doing at a city level also to protect the rights of our?
No, I think
Should be covered? Okay, great. All right, then one last question, and I think it's kind of been answered, but just in a few words for everybody. What the question is, what can we do now to stop this administration? And then to add to that, how can we as the public be engaged? What can we do to help? So from everybody's perspective, what can we do to stop this administration and what can we do to help? Well, we'll start with Casey and move it to sorry.
So Donald Trump is going to be in office for the next 3.5 years. There is not a lot we can do to stop that, but I think lawsuits are very important. And I think gearing up to win in 2026 and 2028 matter a lot. And so that's stating the obvious, but so how do we actually gear up to win? And I think, I was an elected Democrat, so I want to see more Democrats win. And I think Democrats limited our, self-imposed limited our reach. We stopped really targeting a lot of people broadly, and we stopped targeting a lot of people in a lot of different states. We too much narrowed out who were we trying to talk to and who we were trying to appeal to. And the ramifications of that are going to last forever. We have to have broader appeal. And there were too many people. My 17-year-old son, who goes to like a hippie school here in Boulder, said, "Mom, Democrats don't want me." That is a message he's getting through his social media feed and through his friends and everything. And that is something we have to pay attention to. Democrats have been too narrow in our message and who we're saying we care about. So we have to really broaden that. And that's what's going to change all these things that we care about.
So I work on behalf of the C3, so I can't legally agree with what former Speaker Becker said there. I really do think that making your voice heard in the way that you can is the single most important thing that we could be doing right now. I think, whether that's contacting your representatives and making sure that they know how you feel, whether that's Congress, Senate, or the legislative branch here in Colorado, saying what, and making sure that Colorado can forge its own path. We have been beholden to a lot of funding from the federal government, and that's because that was always coming, and we knew it was there. But it's clear that in the times that we are in, things are not as stable as I think we all once thought they were. And so if we as Coloradans, and Senator Amabile mentioned all of the great rights bills, we were very proud to work on the immigration bill that she mentioned to make sure that due process is still the rule of law here in Colorado. And so, doing those things as our own state to be able to do that, and really making sure that in 2026 we all get out to vote and make sure that that we can do things in our state regardless of what the federal government does to protect our citizens.
So I'll just add, because I agree with everybody, you all are here tonight because you have curiosity about what's happening and because you care about our country. And that is a really excellent step in the right direction. And, we all turned out for the No Kings March. Well, I don't know if we all did, but I know that thousands of people did. And I see people at the protests and at NOAA and making your voices heard, and that matters. And reaching out to us, reaching out to our office. Actually, please stop emailing us. Just kidding. You should keep emailing. But we do have to broaden the reach, and we have to have better messaging around what it is we are going to do to make people's lives better, because that's what we're going to need to keep winning elections. And then we need to follow through and actually do the things that we are messaging about.
I agree with everything that Casey and Judy said. If you look at an electoral map by county, Trump won about 2,500 counties, and the Democrats won about 500. That is not sustainable, and it's untenable. Okay? We must have broader appeal. That means we have to be supportive of candidates in other states who don't necessarily have the same view that we have on every issue. Okay? We are a very progressive community, and I am glad that we are, and it's a great thing. But you know what? You need to win New Mexico, you need to win Nevada, you need to win Oregon, Michigan, Minnesota. The points of view that are going to be expressed by candidates in those places are not going to be identical to what we expect of candidates in Boulder. And unless we become tolerant of that and allow for someone who does not match our viewpoint on all issues to succeed and prosper, we're going to stay at 500 counties. And those counties are coastal counties, they're places like Austin, and they are not nearly enough to win us a national election. So unless we, in effect, recognize that we must be broader in our approach and more tolerant of those who are close to us but not quite in sync with us on every issue, this is where we're going to stay. And we will have a Republican president in 28 and in 32. And I am desperate to avoid that, but I think that's what's going to be required for us to broaden our appeal. And one last comment, it is astonishing to me that the Democratic Party has lost its identity as the party of the working man. All my life, we were the party of the working man. Not anymore. And that is something that has to be remedied, or this is where we're going to stay. We're going to have nice little gatherings in Boulder and revel in our progressivism, and nothing will change.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what's been said. I think that if we need to focus on winning, right? I mean, we as a party have been focused on being righteous and correct, and we haven't focused on winning. And I think you can act consistent with your values and win elections at the same time. And I think if we're going to be a Big Ten party, we need to actually be a Big Ten party. We need to welcome people into the Democratic Party, or not shove them out, who may not agree with everything that we agree with, just like Mark was saying. We need to recognize that a Democrat running in Alabama is not going to have the same profile as a Democrat running in Colorado. And we need to be okay with that, because if we want Democrats to control Congress and to achieve the many goals that we have as a party and as a country, we need to do that. And I would also say that we need to do more listening and less lecturing. And one of the greatest treats of my time as a regent has been getting to know my Republican colleagues. The Board of Regents is a partisan board. It's 5 Democrats, 4 Republicans, thank God. But my Republican colleagues, when I talk to them about, we have these really great conversations when we're at our meetings. And, we come away from those conversations, we like each other personally. We have so much in common. And I sometimes ask them, like, are you sure you're a Republican? Right? And they're like, yeah, but, I think we agree on more than we disagree on. And I think we need to approach people in general, especially Republicans, who we may not have the same political affiliation with, from that kind of like generosity of spirit, that like they actually may agree with us on a lot of things, instead of seeing them as the enemy, and engaging people in conversation about what really matters to them. because I have found in those discussions that we really do share a lot in common, and we want to work toward the same goals. And a lot of them really don't like Trump. So I think a lot of people out there are really cynical about what he's doing, and they're just afraid to say it publicly, but they think it. We need to capitalize on that and figure out a way to get the majority back. But that's me. Yeah.
Well, wasn't this a wonderful panel? These wonderful experts all across the field. If we didn't get your question tonight, in the handouts, there's information as to how you can reach out to each one of the panelists to ask those questions. And this was also live streamed on Judy's Facebook page, so you can watch it back there. I wanted to say special thanks to the Velvet Elk, and then I'll pass it off to Judy to close it out for the night.
Okay, thanks everybody for being here. And I want to say a special thanks to Robin Noble, who is my legislative aide, who actually makes all of this stuff happen and works way more than she gets paid for. And we're a team, and just want to make sure to acknowledge that. And also to say thank you to the Velvet Elk and the staff here at the Velvet Elk. This has just been a great place for events, and they're always accommodating, and we really appreciate that. So thank you.
And thank you, Senator Amabile, for representing us.